Hello, everybody. So welcome to our discussion, our webinar on AI and candidate experience. So there are going to be some people on the call that I know. So a very warm welcome to you in that respect. And there are going to be some people in the call that I don't know. So let's get started. Maybe people can just give an introduction to themselves in the chat. That would be great. Who have we got coming? Who have we got joining? Don't be shy. Have we got people there? Hello, Lucy from London. Hello, Michael. Great to meet you. Anybody else? Lorraine from Bristol. Claudia. Helen from Woking. I was born in Woking, Helen. Vladimir, I'd love to live in Spain. Phil from Hemel, great to see you here. Ellen from Oslo. What a range of people that we've got. This is fantastic. Hey, now that we've got that out of the way, it will be great. So don't feel, don't be shy to be writing your questions into the chat. We'll certainly get around to questions at the Q&A answer towards the end of the webinar as well. So let me introduce myself. My name is Austin Field. I'm the regional customer success manager for EMEA based at SmartRecruiters. And let me introduce the panel to you. So if I hand over to Daniel. Daniel, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Of course. Yeah. Hello, everyone. I am Daniel, CEO and founder of Start. In short, what Start does is we help a lot of companies all over the world measure and improve candidate experience. And due to the nature of our business, we obviously also have a lot of data going through our platform from stakeholders like candidates, hiring managers, etc. Super excited to discuss this specific topic and the change we're seeing in recruitment right now.
Thanks, Daniel. We've got two Marks, which is going to be a little bit confusing. So I'll go Mark H. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Austin. Hey, I'm Mark. I work at Wise. I've been here for 6.5 years now, and I lead the talent operations and transformation team. So what that means is we do all of the fun stuff that sits behind that talent engine. So all of the tools, the tech, the process, candidate experience, and all of that fun stuff.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. And over to Mark R.
Yeah, the other Mark. So nice to meet you all. My name is Mark, obviously head of sales and partnerships at Cronofy. We provide a scheduling automation platform to get rid of interview scheduling to help companies such as Wise to reduce their time to schedule and provide a superb candidate experience to move them through the process swiftly. So nice to meet you all. Been looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That's great. So let's kick off with a quick poll. And it would be really, hopefully everybody can see that the polls have popped up into the chat there. So which part of the hiring process feels most difficult to automate without hurting the candidate experience? Answers are coming in. Thanks all. Application and screening, interview scheduling. Looks like feedback and communications coming through nicely there. Interview and assessment. Any more? Yeah. Maybe a couple more seconds before we move on. So where are we up to now? So feedback and communication. So obviously this is going to be a stronger topic, thinking about that candidate experience. I think, as we kick off the discussion here, let's hand it across to Mark R, actually, so that he can just take us through the data and the research that he's done. And this is actually a sneak peek as well, Mark, isn't it? So over to you.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Austin. So every year we conduct a survey, and we provide a candidate expectations report to kind of figure out what's important for candidates, because a lot of times, what we see, and also us as a company, we sit in our own bubble, so we don't really know what's going on with candidates. So Cronofy goes out every year and conducts an interview across 7,000 candidates in 7 different countries to see, okay, what actually goes on with those candidates. First, right off the bat, one of the things that we see a lot is, and candidates mentioned this, it takes on average 7.8 days from application to the first interview scheduled. So most companies already start with a deficit, and during the candidate's journey, you have to make up for that. So we see a lot of companies are losing talent here, and kind of a lot of candidates, they say 33% they don't feel respected. So it's all about that speed, momentum, especially in the initial phases. That is important to make that first impression. And the result of that is 50% of candidates will not engage with your brand again. And I think Start will have some examples on this where companies actually suffered from brand reputation damage because they had or delivered a bad candidate experience, because internal roadblocks didn't make it possible to have a swift process in place. What is interesting, and then if I look at the poll, I can see kind of a few data points that align, especially candidates pick the lack of communication as their biggest struggle, and transparency. And if you look at the poll right now, you can see assessment and feedback and communication is difficult to automate, and it kind of reflects in the data that we see from a candidate's perspective, which is really interesting. I'll have a few more data points to back that up. So especially with the rise of AI, it's interesting because a lot of candidates are using AI to optimize CVs, but also to tailor CVs to match their job description. So the barriers are becoming lower, which means they can apply for different roles at the same time. So a great candidate, for example, will apply to 3 to 4 roles, and then recruitment teams have to kind of make sure they respond swiftly. So candidates are expecting more speed, and they get the tools to make it possible to apply for multiple roles, where in the past that was different. It took a longer time. So what we're seeing is more candidates are actually using AI. So each year we see the number of people that are not using AI are dropping. So from our report, it's only 38% this year who said, yeah, we don't use AI, and that's significantly dropping. So I think a lot of TA specialists will feel this in their recruitment process, in the number of applications they receive, and kind of the pressure they're on to deliver. Human touch is what we are talking about here today. 75% or almost 75% of the candidates do want this and expect this from the recruitment process. But that's where the nitty-gritty and the tough parts come into play. Is how do you actually make that happen when a lot of recruitment teams are under pressure? So that's kind of what we're gonna talk about today. And Austin, especially Daniel and the practitioner Wise Mark from Wise will have some examples on how to utilize this. So this kind of goes back to the poll as well. Where do they actually expect to speak to a real human? Video interviewing is definitely an open door, but also interview scheduling, which is interesting because obviously we provide an interview scheduling solution. It's not so much the coordination, but anything else that comes in between. So we see on average, it takes 3 to 6 days to schedule an interview. That's not what people want, but they do want to be approached like, hey, we want to put you to the next round. Here's how you can schedule your next interview, for example. And then initial application reviews and CV checking are high amongst those as well. And again, touching upon what we've mentioned previously, like I said, Start will have some examples. They will warn others on bad experiences. So some of the data points that we have around interview rounds, either one in the first round, it doesn't really matter, but in like the later stage, if they have a bad experience, they will either post it online or talk to their peers. And especially if you look at Glassdoor reviews and interview experiences, a lot of times people will talk about it in a negative way, and people will read and see that amongst others. Almost 25% of senior management. So if you mess up at that stage, they will talk and warn others, about their own experience. What is an interesting data point across, AI is how do candidates actually feel about, talking to a bot or talking to humans. So when you feel it's too much automation at play, they don't feel respected and they feel they're just a number, and it doesn't make them feel it's about them. So that's kind of the balance we're looking for, and also in this panel discussion. Last final data point that I wanted to share is 41% will leave the recruitment process if it takes too long to schedule, and that goes up obviously if it takes longer than a week, 2 weeks, and we'll have these data points ready in the actual report, which you can register for in through this link, and we'll send out the actual report with the email that goes out after this as well. So definitely register to get the full report. This is a preview, and I'll hand it off to Austin to kind of dive into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And I would encourage you to download the report. It's so insightful. And the one thing that immediately struck me is where the poll was suggesting interviewing and assessment and feedback and communication, and aligning that to your results already, Mark. So it does seem that the industry is really trying to address that candidate experience. So I'll open it up to the panel, to Mark, and let's start with Mark and then move across to Daniel as well. When you see this data, what does it tell you about how candidate experience is shifting, and how should TA teams respond? And I think it's probably worthwhile just recognizing the amount of strain, as Mark R suggested there, the amount of strain that TA teams are under to deliver their service. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. TA teams all over are expected to do more with the same, or even more with less in some cases, because of the rise of AI. Yet candidates, 74%, I think it was from that data, are saying they expect there to be more human touch in there. And those two things can't really exist in parallel. There needs to be a certain degree of automation, a certain degree of AI used within the process to allow us to spend more time being human with those candidates. And that's the tricky balance to strike, I would say.
Daniel, thank you. Well, Daniel, where are you on this?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of dimensions here. First of all, I mean, one of my favorite quotes is a very old Henry Ford quote, meaning if you have asked people what they want at that point of time, then they would have liked a faster horse rather than a car. And for me, it's a little, there's a serious change going on, and change is always, for most people, a little bit, let's say, difficult and maybe also scary. So you prefer, kind of what you know. And I think that does not mean that change is bad necessarily, right? But I think change requires normally, increased communication about what is going on. So, everything is so much easier to drive change if you are good at communicating, if you are transparent about what is going on. And of course, also if you engage and involve the stakeholders facing that change. And I think that's what I'm thinking, right? Another point that I want to make is, or a reflection that I have when seeing it, that is really the importance of designing the hiring process with empathy rather than efficiency. You automate for efficiency, and that is most likely something that the candidates actually would like, if they get something faster and better and stuff like that. But the process itself, the experience itself, have to be with empathy. So that's just top of mind reflections.
Yeah. Daniel, there is this fine line, isn't there, as you rightly say, between efficiency in terms of speed and also making sure that we're empathic to the process as well, or to the individuals at the other end of that are on the receiving end of that as well. Mark, what if anything from your perspective that you know that?
Yeah, I think from what we are seeing across the board is, it's all about obviously speed. That's kind of the pressure that people are on. Then on the other side, you've got the personalization. It's kind of what people are looking for, especially during, well, the initial stages, but all stages, I would say, because that's where you lose people, right? Because that's the brand, and the brand experience they have is, okay, if there's quick, personalized, and I feel valued, that will also be the culture that I'm going to join if I join the actual company. So for me, it's a lot around, how are you presenting the actual company to your candidates and employee? And this has become a really, really important part of the employer branding, I would say.
And there's also a lot of investment into the employee branding, isn't there? So that needs to be always continued to be reevaluated, and actually that return on investment on all that effort that goes into that process as well. We've touched upon it. We've touched upon it a couple of times when we've been talking about speed and efficiency. Let's go to a negative side of automation, and maybe we could just highlight some of the concerns that we would have as a panel if, let's use the word backfire, if automation backfires. So what would be the impact as we see it from that?
Maybe I can share. I obviously look at a lot of data, more or less every day from candidates all over the world, and one of the big drivers for either good or bad candidate experience, or just the candidate experience in general, that is like the duration of the process and pace. So how fast are companies at getting back to candidates with either a yes or a no, or some kind of update on the hiring process, right? And of course, it gives a negative rating if that is taking too long time. So what we have seen there is more companies automating parts of that process more. But I can just share, based on, and that's backed up with a lot of data, that one thing that is worse than a very, very, let's say, that you wait for a long time getting rejected, that is if you are instantly rejected. Because then it's a 0 for sure that you will get in that rating. So I think that is an example where you have, I think the purpose is to do a faster process, deliver better candidate experience, but it ends up backfiring. That's just a we see.
I think the point is there's not an experience there, right? If you apply for a job and you instantly get a rejection, there's no experience there at all. So you've got to have a process that's long enough to at least give some sort of experience for them to kind of relate back on. And when Mark shared that data, one of the key things is that people don't feel like they're being valued or they're being assessed correctly, or they feel like they're just a number. Well, yeah, if you apply and you get an instant rejection, of course you're going to feel that.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads into the next bit, doesn't it? Which is, maintaining that empathy through the process. So if we were to make some almost some automatic recommendations, really, what does empathy look like if we go to that feedback and communication? And I think, Mark, you've mentioned there already, an immediate rejection doesn't understand or doesn't give any form of feedback back to an individual. But what other recommendations do we think that we can make as part to the team on the call here now?
I think in particular, if it's an automated rejection that is just a blanket no without any kind of details, right? If you can't sponsor a visa for a role and you've set up an automated rejection for people that do need a visa, like I can understand getting instant rejection saying, unfortunately, we're unable to sponsor for this. You're giving that detailed feedback to that person. And again, it's an individual personalized feedback. I think there's more of a case for that. I think candidates that are moving into the process that do kind of meet that basic criteria, there's other ways you can go about kind of handling some of this situation, looking at skills testing earlier on in the process, right? So they actually feel like they've had a chance to demonstrate those skills, and then being able to give detailed feedback on the skills assessment that they took, saying where they were strong or where they need to kind of develop further, etc. So giving the candidate something back that early on in the process will generally lead to a slightly better experience, even if they are being rejected. And I think we use STARD, and I think the really interesting thing that I've seen with feedback, we have a lot of candidates that are rejected that still give us a 10 out of 10 for experience, because we've given them that detailed feedback and we've explained very clearly why and what they need to do to improve. And I think that's the measure of a really good experience, is even if you're being rejected from a process, but you still kind of rate and value that experience you've had.
Yeah.
And I think a point is also, I can see there's also a question from Steve saying, what is the sentiment on process, or how does the sentiment from candidates vary between rejected candidates and successful candidates? And of course, successful candidates are generally happier and are giving higher satisfaction ratings than the rejected ones. More specifically, benchmark on hired candidates is 80 on NPS, and on unrejected it's closer to 0. And I don't think you should strive for getting rejected candidates to 80, but it can make a whole lot of a difference on your brand reputation, getting it from 0 to, let's say, 20 or 30. And that is maybe by designing this process. And I think, so what is, if you apply empathy as like a design principle, then you can almost translate it to, I think, human or personalized, right? And that comes down to, for instance, that instant rejection. If you just take that case, maybe you have used 3 hours, 4 hours, applying for the job and read about on the career side, and you were super excited because you find yourself a good fit for that job, and then you are rejected in 30 seconds. That's not a very good human experience, right? Then better to create some delays there in that process. Another thing is, if there can be a perception of automation or using AI as a computer or a robot doing the job, maybe what you need to do is to already and upfront tell, we have applied these technologies in how we do recruitment, and we have done this for these reasons. There are very few companies that are having a strategy of providing a bad candidate experience. You know what I mean? That would, I've never heard about that. So the point is actually, but I see a lot of companies not being good enough at communicating how they are doing. And it sounds super simple, but it is apparently difficult. And I actually also meet companies that are afraid of communicating, because what if that is backfiring? And at high scale, we don't, in our data at least, see that backfiring. We see that the companies doing communication around how they do automation, how they apply different technologies, they are also the ones getting rewarded with higher satisfaction ratings.
What is interesting, if you look at the data, one of the data points that I showed was the the 2 top things that people are expecting, or which is causing frustrations: lack of communication and lack of transparency, which almost made up 50% of the answers, which ties back into what you're saying. If you're communicating clearly and you're being transparent about the process, that already goes a long way on, getting people know. And it's all about, like you said, expectation management almost. What can people expect, and how are you making it happen? Really helps.
100%.
Yeah, 100%. So being the youngest person on this panelist here, on the panel, I'm going to open up the conversation about demographics.
Austin, tell us what Jens said.
It's something close to my heart. So we've got baby boomers, Gen Z. Quite frankly, I can't keep up with it now, but that's probably a sign of my age, as it happens. So how do we make sure that we're targeting, the right message, or that personalization to the right audience? And that may also include internal applications or referral applications. So I'll go across to Mark R, that is, as opposed to Mark H. What do you reckon?
So I think what you're seeing as well is, especially the younger candidates, Gen Z, as you would call it, they are growing up in the world of AI, so they are expecting a lot more speed and momentum. So again, when we take myself as an example, and across we provide, we really value that human touch, and kind of that's how we were brought up. So it's really about personalization for almost each generation, and making sure it's inclusive for everyone. And that's going back to what Daniel said. If you start with empathy and try to understand who your audiences are, then you can adjust accordingly to make it a scalable process.
I think the interesting thing as well, we're on a sliding scale with this. Like right at the moment, there's still a lot of resistance to AI and to change, and a lot of nervousness around that. If you fast forward 5-10 years and kind of those newer generations start coming into the workforce, they're going to have grown up using AI day in, day out. They'll almost be expected to be part of the process. There may even be an expectation that you don't speak to a human that early on in the process. So the really interesting thing is like how far along we are on that scale and who's going to kind of move along first. But eventually that's the way it's heading.
Yeah, but things can. Sorry, Austin, I just want to say that can also move hand in hand, right? Because maybe you have candidates. I have at least seen a lot of candidates being super upset about the motivation letter they need to write, or its CVs being outdated and stuff like that, and that's actually maybe what can be replaced in a completely different format going forward in a more automated AI-driven kind of world. So hopefully change will make things better.
Yeah, for sure. Feedback is key, isn't it, Daniel? Let's face it. It's or understanding and listening to that candidate feedback is key. Let's do a quick poll, actually. So, is the poll up there? Yeah. What's your biggest challenge with automation and candidate experience? What have we got? What have we got so far? Balancing speed and genuine candidate care. Yeah. Exactly, Daniel and Mark, but with what you've been talking about there, isn't there? And I think just looking at that, there is a real desire, even from the organisations that I work with, of that genuine candidate care, and within that process, after all, we are all human, aren't we? Closely followed behind making automation feel personal and human.
But I think, and I'm going to repeat myself a little bit. Sorry about that. But the point is, of course, if you for instance are implementing automated rejections, and your purpose about that is to increase your own efficiency, then that's not a good start. That's not a good starting point. It's a much better starting point, saying actually we see that we are too slow at getting back to our candidates. How do we get faster back to them with updates and a message about if they have moved on into the process? And then, okay, how would that look like? What would the ideal scenario be? What would be kind of the service level agreement we can live up to? Then step 2, how do we automate that?
Yeah.
And for me, that is the essence of what goes wrong on that balancing speed and candidate care. That is actually that you are in a way taking the candidate care in step 2.
Yes. Yeah. It's about removing the automation so the people who are listening to this call can actually do the job, rather than what's the word I'm looking for there? To remove the friction and to maintain that human contact and getting AI to work for both parties, I think, as well.
Interview scheduling is, I mean, I don't know, it's almost obvious as Cronofy is here, but it is an obvious case for automation, right? Because it makes something more hassle-free and faster. And who would not like that? It's so much easier also when I'm coordinating meetings with whoever that we can do out, and we don't have to go back and forth on that calendar, so
I think Daniel, you're absolutely key there, isn't there? To automate that interview scheduling as part of the process, to release that time spent would be critical for the TA teams and also for the candidate experience as well. I mean, let's face it, and that showed on the last poll as well as one of the highest, and even from Mark's data there. I'm keen to move on to Mark, the other Mark, and just explore some of the lessons that you've learned. I know that you've been on a journey, so perhaps you could give us a little bit of context, Mark, in terms of what does hiring look like at Wise?
Yeah, so we're about 6,500 people big now. It was 900 when I started six and a bit years ago. So we've gone through quite a lot of growth. We're probably hiring around 2,500 people a year, 125 different nationalities, 11 different key locations across the globe. So that's kind of a bit of a hint of the scale at which we're operating at the moment.
So busy and massive expansion.
Yes, and likely to continue. I would expect.
And so what does the future look like as well? Are you likely to see increase in that number or?
Yeah, I mean, increase, I'm not sure, but we're likely to stay sort of steady at that growth for as far as I can see into the future. Yeah, we're expecting to hire similar sort of numbers this year. We're expecting to do more with the same size team.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And there we have it again, aren't we? You know, we're expected to do more effectively with less as well. So what was the first thing, you know, from your perspective that you decided to automate or enhance using AI? And critically, I think, why did you start there?
Yeah, I think for us, it was that the first thing we looked at automating was the interview scheduling. Because I think there's the difference between AI and automation, which a lot of people still kind of get this confused, but automation is basically creating those kind of manual tasks, repetitive tasks, whereas AI is almost like sort of simulating human thoughts and human intelligence, right? So that kind of agentic look. So when it comes to automating, the interview scheduling was the easy bit to do. We use Cronofy, and we also use SmartRecruiters for some of that. Probably the biggest win that we've had with the automation side of things is where we've automated the self-scheduling link to be sent out to candidates when they move into recruiter screen stage. So we're interviewing thousands of candidates each month. So even moving a candidate into recruiter screen, they're needing to go into Cronofy or to do it via SmartRecruiters, set up when you want the candidate to be interviewed, etc. It still took a couple of minutes per candidate. We've now moved that, so as soon as the candidate moves into that stage, they get an email with a list of all of the available times that recruiter has in the next two weeks. They self-select a time. It automatically sets up the meeting, the invite, the Zoom link, everything. So in terms of automation, it's a fairly small use case, if you like, which is just recruiter screening, but it's saved us like hundreds of hours of time.
And I guess the next follow-up question for that one is, what are the team doing now with that time, time saved? And then actually we'll then move across to Mark as well to understand how Cronofy supported you with that process as well. So
yeah, I think the reason that we try to give that time back to recruiters is we can spend more time sourcing candidates at top of funnel, because generally we find that those candidates convert at a slightly higher rate than those that come in through the inbound stuff. So I think that's one of the key reasons, is we then free up more time for recruiters to spend with candidates later in the process and to be sourcing candidates to bring into the process at that earlier stage.
Right. Okay. So, Mark, from your perspective, so you know, it's obviously that that Wise, you know, really leaned into the services that Cronofy provide. You know, can you talk about how scheduling automation supported their journey?
Yeah, so obviously the automation piece is kind of an open door. That's also kind of what we advise those early stages. You want to automate at least the scheduling piece. But one of the other things I know Wise are doing, especially with panel interviews and using like interviewer pools, is where they have a big interview pool for engineering, for example, where they need one or two out of a group. And then we apply the constraints such as limits and whatnot. So also later down the line, when they get a bit more complex, and like you have interviewer limits, you have a big pool, if you can automate these type of tasks where before those lived in Excel, for example, that's one thing they're using. And also it's an internal change management piece. So for instance, we have an availability report, which can be used and display like which the hiring manager interviewers that are part of that interview process, how much time do they actually have available for those interviews? So you can become more proactive and streamline your process up front rather than being reactive and try to band-aid a broken process almost. So for me, from what I've seen, we've kind of co-innovated with Wise on what the hiring process should look like, and we see this more often with other companies. It's not only the interview scheduling you're solving, but you're also preparing other departments the best way possible to support the hiring process, which is another aspect of a great candidate experience. So I think those are kind of the main topics, and I also feel like a lot of the delays come from playing hot potato with candidates. They go to a coordinator or they'll go to a hiring manager. So if recruiters are able to stay in charge, they have one touch point, but because everything else is automated, it takes them, it's less of a burden.
Yeah. It's great to hear about that collaboration between the two Marks in terms of redesigning the process to actually take account of the changing technologies that we've got available to us as well. And let's face it, technology is changing consistently and constantly all the time. So this amount of change that we're likely to go through, partnerships are going to be, I guess, one of the things that partnerships are always going to be important to any TA process. Let's go back to the empathy as well, and I know, Daniel was very keen on, very focused on empathy within the process. Mark, what kind of little touch points have you put within your process that let's use the moments that count, the value moments. What do they look like?
Yeah, I was going to say that's the key thing with candidate experience. I don't think it's realistic to have an exceptional experience from beginning to end, because it's just by definition an exceptional experience, and it needs to be exceptional points. So I think, to your point, it is all around those moments, and those moments can be pretty simple. Candidates getting feedback will put you ahead of half of the companies out there, because candidates do not get feedback after their interviews. So something as small as that. We've also something small that we still get comments on is on our Zoom waiting rooms. When candidates join, rather than your host has not joined yet, there's a message on there that says, like, take a deep breath, have a glass of water, think about what you're going to have for dinner this evening, or whatever it was, but like a kind of a jokey message to help relax candidates. Something else we were potentially looking at is how we can automate sending a good luck text to a candidate via the ATS. So whenever a candidate has an interview in the morning, they get a text message to say, good luck for your interview today from the Wise team.
Yeah.
Things like that, where you're doing the unexpected. I think that's where you're going to then delight candidates and give them that exceptional experience. If you think back to any exceptional experiences you've had in the past, and I had one when I was in Singapore. I went and stayed at Marina Bay Sands, a bit of a treat for myself. And when I turned up, they upgraded me to a suite for the night. I was only there for one night. I've told hundreds of people about this ever since. Like, it was such a small thing for them. The room wasn't even that nice, to be honest, but just the unexpected turning up to a check-in desk and someone saying, oh yeah, by the way, we've upgraded you. That unexpected moment was such a highlight of that trip, but I still talk about it 10 years on.
Yeah,
that's kind of that candidate experience and delighting the candidate. I couldn't tell you anything else about the rest of that trip,
except for that. Yeah, and Daniel, I mean, that's a great anecdote, isn't it, to say good luck with your interview, because it does. I think personally, it shows that genuine level of care that we actually want people to succeed. We don't want to grab anybody into an interview that we don't think that can do the job. We're looking to people in that respect. So, how does this align to what you see within the data that you've got within STAR, then, Daniel?
It's a little bit hard for me to put it at like quantifiable scale with data, but I can say that I have seen, for instance, companies where it's those little small human tweaks, talking about human, that is actually making a difference. So for instance, once there was a company we saw, they were changing the messaging in their candidate communication, and for instance, up to summer they said, have a nice summer. and that just gave a lot of positive vibes the other way. Hey, thank you so much. Also a good summer to you, rather than just saying best regards.
Yeah.
So and so basically you could follow the year, right, and maybe change those small little tweaks to make it a little bit more human, a little bit more personalized, and that would actually enhance the candidate experience. And those little things are making a difference. So yeah, I totally agree. Another reflection that I just have while listening to the two Marks here, that is like, I think it's so, and I think it's relevant for people who have joined it. I think it's so tempting to automate and AI the visible parts of the hiring process. But that is also the most risky part. I mean, where what Mark actually has done is he has started with the invisible part, the back office kind of things. How can we increase efficiency there to free up more time to be with candidates? And we all know that both automation and AI has still some limitations to actually deliver a good enough job. So rather than being frustrated about that, or dare you risk your brand by replacing the chance you have to actually be with your candidates, maybe better to replace your ongoing manual back office kind of tasks. Would be a recommendation.
Yeah. No, thank you. I'm just conscious of time as well, and I'm keen that if we get any questions as well, that we just take the opportunity to answer those. So I'm just going to, and I'm going to ask the panel, if there's somebody out there now listening right now who's looking to explore or start automation as part of, introduce automation as part of their hiring process, with the aim of maintaining that candidate experience as well, what would be the pieces of advice that you'd give them, if we could just do the biggest piece of advice that you could offer? What would it be?
I can start. I think for me, it's just pick something and start it. Like you're not going to learn until you start to implement some sort of automation. So I would pick a pain point and focus on a small area. So when we did the recruiter screening idea, we actually started that just in our design function initially, because we knew it was a low volume of interviews. We ironed out the kinks after the first couple of weeks. Then we rolled it out to all of our analytics teams across Europe, ironed out a few more kinks, and then rolled out globally. So it was a kind of a month and a half rollout. But you need to start somewhere, and you need to kind of learn from the mistakes that you make in that automation to then be able to roll out globally and have that kind of impact. But that would be the thing, is pick something and start.
So you have to draw that line in the sand, don't you, really, to start? Here's my starting point.
Yeah.
Mark, what would you say?
Yeah, I think kind of echoing what Mark is saying, but also that's a starting point for personalization at scale that you want to achieve, but you have to design for it. And a great way of doing it is gradual rollout and test cases before you start with a big bang.
And Daniel, any what would be your thoughts?
I just mentioned before the point about maybe starting with what happens behind the curtains rather than what is happening in front of them. And another thing, and that is of course a bit of product placement, I know that, but change is just making feedback loops more crucial. So it might be that you don't have start, and that's of course okay, but then find a way to actually figure out what the receiving end are experiencing when you are starting to do these things. If you are making change, then naturally you need to accelerate your data point for understanding what happens.
Well, the first question would be why aren't people using Star? There you go. So
Can I just say, since we've gone live with Stars, the level of data and detail that we have to work with to deeply understand what the problems are of our process is like, it was genuinely game changing. And this is how we've measured the candidate experience when it comes to also implementing Cronofy. We get comments on our surveys to say how seamless our interview scheduling is. We never had that before, and we never have candidates volunteering that information. Now we do, and now we can capture that. So yeah.
And it's tapping, Mark, it's tapping a little bit into some of the dialogue that is going on in the chat right now, where I think it was Rob who started it, saying, why are recruiters not rewarded for candidate experience? And of course, I mean, that is a hard job for a start, selling our software, and then maybe also for you to buy it if there is not a conceptual buy-in of candidate experience being an important and business relevant metric. And some organizations are not there yet. And what I can just say to the ones listening in, that is keep fighting for that, because there is direct correlation between candidate experience and hiring efficiency, brand reputation, and stuff like that. And what we all need to become better at, that is maybe building those ROI cases for CFOs and more financially focused, you can say, persons.
Thanks. The thing that's really struck me with this conversation is the vastness of the topic. And I guess the biggest takeaway that I've got from this is that candidate experiences or candidate expectations are really evolving, aren't they? You know, they're constantly in a state of change. And while speed matters, because many of our KPIs involve the concept of time to hire, but it shouldn't be at the expense of any form of candidate engagement and respect to the candidate as well. And what I'm going to do within the last couple of minutes or so is just ask, maybe start with Daniel, just as the key takeaways that he's got from this in terms of any closing statements that you've got as we just round off the webinar as well.
Yeah, I think be careful about making candidates' expectations drive your change, because I think, companies will also drive this change, and that will actually change also expectations for the candidates. So back to Mark's point about experimenting and identifying the things you want to work with, but just remember to design for empathy and be really, really good at understanding the receiving end of what you are doing.
Right. Over to Mark R. What is your closing statement?
Yeah, again, start small, get results, and listen to what candidates are saying. And one of the great ways to start, like if you're not using Start, Glassdoor, or asking proactively what the feedback was, will get you a long way. And that's kind of, we typically advise when you implement a scheduling solution to at least have one question around interview scheduling in the survey, because then the answers will give you the ROI and also the justification to go a step further almost. So, and you can use Start or any other solution, obviously, but it's the one thing that I would say.
Thanks, Mark. And finally, over to you, Mark H.
Yeah, I think pick a problem, start small, try and kind of personalize that scale. I would say bring that into the design process right at the beginning. But those are the key things to start with, I would say.
Yeah, and I think the chat that Kayla just made, this is all about, Kayla, we agree, I think, from the panel here, that this really speaks to the heart of how technology enhances our opportunity for real human connection. And I think that summarizes perfectly the discussion. I'll close today, and I do hope that we've sparked some ideas or some ways of thinking for you to explore with your organizations. But don't let it end here. Let's keep the conversation going. We've dropped all of our LinkedIn profiles into the chat as well. So connect with some follow-ups and just say hi. If there's an opportunity to do some further connection, then let's do that. But we really thank you for your time. I'd like to thank Mark H, Mark R, and Daniel for their time on the call today. Mark, for sharing your story about Wise. Mark, for the insights that you provided with your data, and also for Daniel for the insights that he's shared in terms of the candidate engagement data as well. So really thank you all.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.